Hey Dahlia, thank you for joining me today. Um, Quick introduction. Dahlia Dreszer, a Colombian-born Panama-raised photographic artist, delves into the complex interplay between identity, memory, and cultural heritage through her work. Her, her large-scale photographs seamlessly integrate the personal with the universal, transforming the interiors of her family's homes into dynamic, multi-layered compositions that challenge the boundaries between the intimate and the external through immersive installations that fuse still life imagery with textiles, plants, and personal artifacts. Dahlia creates visually captivating environments that engage viewers in a narrative of diaspora, displacement, and the quest for belonging. Her approach disrupts traditional photographic techniques, blending digital manipulation with painterly methods to construct dreamlike, multi-dimensional spaces that reflect the fluidity of cultural identity. A graduate of Emory University with a specialization in media and photography, Dahlia's pioneering work transcends the limitations of the photographic medium, pushing its boundaries and offering novel perspectives. Each composition she creates interrogates the theme of artifice, color, and spatiality, inviting critical reflection on our perceptions of home, culture, and personal history. Through her distinctive visual language, Dahlia prompts viewers to contemplate the evolving nature of identity and the ongoing search for belonging in a world marked by constant change. Dahlia, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
of course, but yeah, no, I definitely. So I met you when I met you. I saw you at Green Space, and you had this lovely conversation, and I was really interested in not many facets of your work. I was really sort of
Yeah.
captured by not only the photographs, but you also talked about AI and how AI also correlates with reality in many ways. And I was really interested in the fact that you kind of combine those two aspects together, both photography to explore themes of identity, memory, and cultural heritage. But I'm really interested in what inspired you to use photography to talk about these ideas of cultural heritage in your art, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And thank you again so much for having me. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you. And thank you for, coming to see the show and engaging here. So to answer your question, I first got interested in in photography from my relationship with my grandmother. She was kind of the only artist in my family and was a photographer and an artist. And she taught me about photography from a very early age. And it was a way for me to connect with her through image making, through the process of going out and taking pictures. And she was named me Dahlia. She loved flowers. Her name was Lily R. Rose. And I always grew up around flowers and images. So that's kind of what inspired photography as a medium from an early start.
Beautiful. That's very, very beautiful. Very poetic as well, as when you think about flowers, you think about the way in which they sort of grow from seeds into full bloom kind of flowers. And that was really interesting to sort of like kind of picture. It's very poetic in the way that you can sort of see the growth from just seed to something that blooms as a way to talk about heritage. I think that's also very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, considering that like we all sort of have a background and our cultures sort of intertwined together. But I also want to know how like the lines that blur between your personal spaces and the outside world in your large
Yeah.
scale photographs and installation. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Definitely. I'm really interested in the concept of home and the sense of in-betweenness and making home in between places. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and raised in Panama. And my parents were my family immigrated from one side immigrated from Syria to Panama, and the other side of my family immigrated from Eastern Europe to Colombia. So I really was kind of born raised with a lot of different identities and cultures as part of who I was. But that also the sense of not belonging to only one place but many places at the same time, kind of like triggered this pursuit of the multicultural and the convergence of cultures, and my interest in exploring heritage, his family histories, and how that shapes who we are. So after several of these moves that I had in my life, I wanted to start thinking more deeply of the relationship that we have in our homes and the objects that we carry in our homes, and also family heirlooms. So what we decide to bring into a new place when we move, what do we leave behind, and from that kind of sociological perspective, I found really interesting to explore. So going back to your question about interior and exteriors, all the images that I created for this project, bringing the outside in, were made in my home or my family's home, where I combine all these different elements, objects that have cultural significance, such as Jewish objects, Panamanian objects, such as la mola, made by the Cuna community in Panama, and textiles that were my grandmother's or part of my family, to tell these stories about and narratives about migration, adaptation, belonging, and displacement. As I'm bringing all this into one confinement, but also having a greater, more broader conversation that embarks multiple cultural contexts and historical moments in time. So that's kind of my interest of the dualities between the exterior and the interior.
Yeah, there's something very rich about this idea of like intersectionality when you sort of bring all these aspects from different parts outside of your world, your domestic sphere. That's really rich and has a lot of sort of meaning behind it, which it's really interesting when you think about it because things have an origin story like behind them for the most part, and sort of kind of adopting that. We live in the United States, and I feel like that's like very common to sort of adopt these sort of and in kind of the pieces of information that come from other places outside of ourselves and kind of bringing them and making them, making them, integrating them into our everyday life. That speaks volumes, especially considering that we're always trying to find meaning in things and trying to come up with symbols that become very personal in our life. So that's really rich in meaning. And I want you also to talk about maybe about these ideas of manipulation, like digital manipulation with traditional photography. How do you sort of see those techniques kind of create something new and maybe unconventional?
For sure, great question. Thank you. So, in my current body of work and project, bringing the outside in, the process is straight from the lens. So, there's no digital manipulation or post production involved in my current in bringing the outside in images. They're mainly like still lifes per se. And but however, I do personally believe there's value in an artistic, there's still artistic integrity in post production and digital manipulating works. My prior body of work, Invisible Cities, was technically different. It did involve layering and post production images. But what you see in bringing the outside in is straight from the lens. So what I try to do is create a sense of balance between artifice and reality. So the viewer may not entirely be sure what they're looking at, and that's part of the intention. There's also this kind of overwhelmingness one feels when looking at the pieces, as they're so full and vibrant with information and detail, bleeding border to border, edge to edge of the frame, with elements that are taken out of context or decontextualized. So, placing objects or certain elements that you may not think go together, or even distorting the perception of scale. That's why maybe the viewer may think that there's additional intervention outside just what's captured through observational placements. But that's how it. The images that you saw at Green Space in my solo show are all except one that is made in collaboration with AI. And I don't know if you were alluding to that piece, that if you wanted me to talk about that one, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah, if you don't mind, kind of also bring that into the picture so we have a
mhm,
better understanding of that deconstruction that you're talking about, and bringing
for
the
sure.
in.
Yeah, definitely. So so in the pursuit of being interested in exploring the balance between artifice and reality, and that visual kind of experience, I'm very interested in the convergence of technology, art, and nature. So there's one piece in the exhibition that I made in collaboration with AI, in which for a long period of time I trained an image AI model on what bringing the outside in means like, feels like, and looks like. I had to learn how to communicate to the machine, and the machine had to learn how to adapt to my communication style. So it really did feel like I was collaborating with another artist per se. And the image that we have up at it's one piece, and it does look different in a sense than the others. of course, it has a different technique. Um, and yeah, so there's more to that piece, but I don't know how, if you want me to continue to go on. Um,
Yeah, especially that piece. I thought it was really interesting how the setting itself was seemed to be like the Everglades. I mean, I don't know
mhm,
if that's what you were sort of hinting towards, which I think that's what you were kind of talking
mhm.
about, which is a rich sort of kind of location here, especially living here in South Florida, and then you combine it with these also intricate sort of like flowers, and also I believe there were sort of like edible plants as well, I believe, if I remember correctly.
An apple.
Yeah, was it?
A pineapple?
Yes, exactly. A pineapple. And that was really interesting in that arrangement and that idea of like the decorative, the kind of like meeting, maybe, I don't know, something the sublime. That's really what I was thinking about. Like the way in which like these pictures become very sort of sublime in the sense where they sort of become a specific place, but we don't know that place. Like we recognize the place, it could be in our mind, but it obviously isn't, like because we see that it's sort of replicated as like the Everglades. And I was really interested in that kind of like that duality between, like we're talking about, between the artificiality and something that becomes something like a more natural. I wonder if we can maybe kind of talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I love how you kind of placed it and summarized it. I think that's beautiful. I appreciate the way you just kind of described that. That truly is, I think, how I was also thinking about it. And you're right, it is the Florida Everglades. So the story behind that piece is that when I moved to Florida, to Miami, I wanted to create a work that kind of symbolized the landscape and the surroundings in which I'm now part of. And I hadn't had the chance when I had just moved to capture the Florida Everglades yet. So I used AI as a tool to help me generate a landscape and a sentiment of the Florida Everglades, and then also combine it with my artistic style, which I have a very particular visual language, which includes a maximalistic design, bright colors that represent my Latin American heritage, and of course flowers that are kind of a staple in this project.
Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely like the idea of also like the elements of the textiles and plants and personal objects. I know that you also talked about your grandmother kind of sort of becoming almost, I don't know if this is right, but becoming like almost like a portrait of your grandmother, in which the way you framed it with all these images and the pictures and flowers and all these decorative motifs that were sort of in the picture. I wonder how those objects shape like the stories in your immersive installations as well, because you also had live plants in your solo show.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question because the all the elements and objects I used, textiles, were highly intentional. So I can kind of talk you through the different elements there, as well as the flowers in the pieces are all rescued flowers. I do these like rescue missions where I go to weddings late when they end, dressed in black. And it's the only day I don't dress in flowers. I always typically I'm colorful and have flowers or something really bright on, and I arrive like right around 1 a.m. or midnight when the event wedding is ending, and I rescue these like huge batches of flowers that are just discarded in the trash. And then I shoot those, and those are the flowers that are part of the different images in the series, bringing the outside in. So that's one of the primary elements. And then the textiles that we see are all my grandmother's either scarves or things she would wear. She would also dress in flowers and use the color red and be very bright. So I've kind of embodied that as well now, and I see myself kind of wearing the things she would and taking images of her objects. And then I also have certain objects that represent my family's migration patterns or my heritage and where my family across generations has lived and had to be displaced due to persecution and different like traumatic experiences. So certain objects that have been in my family for generations are also in those in the works to kind of talk about those stories of adaptation and belonging. I'm really interested in exploring like the themes of adaptation, and that's why also I think the technology perspective with my AI collaboration, I see that as a way of adaptation, and looking at things as a new like a fresh start, and how we as humans our need to adapt is just like core, and it can be manifest in different ways, from having a forced displacement to having an intrusive technology kind of take over or what we know to be true. So interested in exploring adaptation, and I also try to communicate that through these elaborate still lifes with these objects and elements I create. And then you also asked about the flowers and the plants, or the live plants in the show.
Mhm.
So I thought that was an important element because I knew I wanted to create an experience that was made the viewer feel part of the journey, or part of the art, or part of that experience. Um, Sorry, there got a glitch on my computer. So the plants in the exhibition are all real life plants, and I collaborated with a fantastic landscape architect, Tournage, and they helped with the botanical designs of the plants in the show. And then I also am trying to open up a conversation between life and death and the beauty of aging, because in the exhibition it's a living organism of a show. Every week it looks different, and I allowed the flowers to die in our face, to kind of open up that dialogue between life and death and the beauty of aging. And I think for me personally, it's also kind of a way to connect with my grandmother who passed away, as she was a flower and I'm a flower in that way. And she, that comfort, that it kind of a way to mourn in a sense, and just putting and exposing to the viewer really like just aggressive flowers that are just dying in front of us, and we're not used to seeing just dead flowers. We're typically used to seeing groomed flowers, and when the flower starts dying, we throw it away. So I'm interested in like reusing what we typically would think is not usable, or what somebody would typically throw in the trash can. I want to like put that in front of us and maybe give it a new life. So all the flowers that I also shoot fresh, I then never really throw them away. I then like give them new lives by drying them in different like technical processes. So all those elements combined in some between the textiles, the objects, the flowers, and the plants, um, bring together the narratives I'm trying to tell.
Yeah, as you speak about it, I really start thinking about like paintings that were, memento mori, like the reminder of death. Like everybody's gonna sort of like elapse. So there's something very poetic, as well as hearing you speak about the flowers and these motifs, these symbols that sort of become sort of like, I mean, homogenous. Like they become like you read them as such, they're very personal, but at the same time, they're very universal in that respect, where you can sort of really put yourself in that position because at the end of the day, we are human beings and we're made out of flesh. So there's something very poetic about the way in which you sort of organize your compositions and how you sort of think about not them just being sort of artificially made or captured, but also to how they sort of live in reality, how they're there in front of you. And also too, something I noticed as well about the exhibition was the how you engage with the senses, not just the visual perception, but also too with the auditory like senses, or also to the sense of smell as well. I found that to be sort of very profound as well. As you enter the space, you almost feel like you're no longer in a gallery. You almost feel like you're in the painting or you're in your photographs, as a matter of fact, which I think that's pretty much what you might be going for, which I guess you probably are. But I
Yeah.
also wanted to touch upon also your upbringing in Colombia, because you also do have these textiles from, I believe, parts of Colombia and Panama, but
Panama. Mhm.
yeah, from Panama. And I wonder, how does that influence the themes of diaspora and belonging in your art?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, the specifically, I'm really interested in the mola. The mola is a handmade textile by the Kuna Yala indigenous people of Panama, the women in particular. And growing up in Panama, being Panamanian, molas is kind of part of our cultural DNA of sorts, per se. Like growing up in Panama, we're surrounded by molas. I typically have, like, I've always had molas in my home or my family's home. And the molas I've used in the exhibition are all molas that they're either part of that been in my family, or and I have to actually return after the exhibition gets put come down, the physical installation of the molas. So it's, as Panamanians, we're really proud of the molas and of the Kuna people. So it's kind of a way of a cultural effervescence, or a way of connecting to our Panamanian traditions. So that's kind of just something I always kind of had in the back of my mind. And then as I started to build up this project and think about all the cultures that I wanted to be represented, of course, connecting to my Panamanian roots, I thought to be critical, is it's the country that shaped me, and I grew up there. So I'm now entering a new project where I'm researching deeply like the Kuna communities in Panama and working closely and collaborating with the Kuna women who are making these textiles to highlight the hands that weave the craft. So in these elaborate installations, I'm also trying to talk about womanhood, femininity, and the relationship that we have with our mothers or with our daughters or with the grandmothers. And mola making is a tradition which girls start doing at 7 years old in the Kuna communities. It's their livelihood, right? It's their way of expressing themselves. And there's a lot of deep symbolisms and meanings and traditions behind the mola. And so I thought it was a really appropriate symbol to include in these installations next to other symbols, such as, for example, Shabbat candles, which are some that are it's a tradition that Jewish women do with their mothers, and it's a bond between mother and daughter or grandmother or the woman in our families. So I like to enter conversations and comparisons between all these different identities that I kind of coexist with. And then not only from that narrative conceptual standpoint, but then also the mola and the Panamanian-ness of it from a visual language perspective. Because molas have a specific visual design principle. They're rich with detail and design, border to border of the rectangular type of shape that they are. They're also really bright and colorful. And then they also have layers, multiple layers of textiles. So all these different design elements and that visual language is also something I've always carried in my different bodies of work. So I thought it really would make sense to not only bring the mola in my inspiration, which it always has been, but also physically in the forefront of these compositions.
Yeah, and I found that to be very profound, also to the echoes of ancestral knowledge that are passed through these traditions are very, powerful and strong. And, it's almost like you're sort of weaving these narratives, these historical narratives into your current moment through sort of looking at the past. And I found that to be something that echoed while you were, during your conversation in your solo exhibition. That's something that really sort of resounded with me as I was sitting there, and I found that to be sort of extremely pivotal just because of the way that, the craft behind these textiles is really kind of important. And these cultural artifacts, really, that in textiles, that's really what they sort of like start to sort of symbolize the concept of migration, how that sort of changes, or might not change, from individual to individual. But I found that to be very profound. And also, I wanted to touch upon also to the installations and the large photographs and bringing the inside out, which I think you touched upon a little bit already. And I want to know how they convey specifically the concept of migration through like the use of like cultural and artifacts and textiles.
Yeah, great question. So I'm bringing the outside in when the different objects that I curate for the installations all kind of have come through different parts of like a story of heritage and belonging. So, for example, different Jewish symbols and objects such as the mezuzah or the menorah or the Hanukkah so these are all like objects that, for example, growing up in a Jewish home, they symbolize our traditions and our heritage and a lot of meaning. So growing up in a Jewish home, like objects always held a really large cultural significance, and it was a way to like externalize our values and our traditions. Um, that's kind of from one perspective. And then kind of part of my family coming from Sephardic heritage, so from Aleppo, Syria, that was always my family. My grandfather, who came from there, was always really proud of where he came from. So that's why I also include certain more Middle Eastern tapestries in the designs of the works, or even a certain Kiddush cup, which it was a cup that he used on Friday nights to do our Shabbat prayers, for example. So I'm including these different elements or objects that came from the lands that my family used to live in, and historically. And then dating back even farther in time, before my family was in Aleppo, Syria, they were in Spain and in Portugal, which I also have a Portuguese nationality, and they had to escape during the Inquisition time. So I also include Spanish and Portuguese tapestries in my work. So all these different elements symbolize like their migratory paths that were basically rooted on displacement and having to move every couple of generations based off of persecution.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting how almost these like rituals kind of sort of become they are embedded in your sort of everyday just as a way to sort of understand who you are and also where you came from as well, which it's really powerful considering like you're talking about persecution and unfortunately, moving from space to migrating, it is something that's also too kind of prevalent now more so than ever, and that's like really important, those traditions to sort of keep alive as a way to sort of they almost become like this faith aspect of self and things of that nature. But I wanted to know how does the immersive experience environment of Green Space Miami blur the lines between the interior and exterior worlds, and what effect does this have on the viewer's understanding of home and identity in your work?
Yes, thank you. So what I tried to build in this experience and show bringing the outside in at Green Space is an environment that kind of simulates the compositions or worlds that I'm creating in my photographic works. So my intention is to bring the art out of the frame, and what I did in the exhibition was create a botanical indoor installation. And then also use all the elements that I have in the pieces, such as the scarves, the textiles, even the dried versions of the flowers that were literally in the works, as well as the objects, and create an elaborate physical installation where the viewer can come in and sit in the same chair that I use in my self portrait, and that also is a symbol throughout the different pieces. And I typically ask visitors that come in, how do they feel in this chair? And certain things I've heard from people are they feel like home, or they feel comfortable, or they feel like tropical, or they feel like they're somebody once said they feel like they're like a queen, or just like just very a sense of empowerment of sorts. So all these this feedback I've received from the viewers has been a beautiful experience, and that concept of blurring like interior and exterior, because even as you mentioned earlier, you felt that you weren't in a gallery space anymore, right? Like that you had entered a new environment. So I'm really interested in the same way I'm creating these like micro environments and massive installations that I then photograph and crystallize through imagery. I'm also now building physically to engage, like you mentioned earlier, all the senses, and kind of bring these stories that I feel to be very strong and these emotions to be very strong out of the frame into the real life experience of the viewer, and then hopefully each viewer that visits the show can then find introspection and reflection in their own life.
Yeah, I definitely felt like that, especially in the throne that you had installed. I was like really interested in all the intricate details. I felt like it wasn't like you said, it was a very introspective moment. It was like a very personal kind of moment, and I really enjoyed the whole work. And thank you so much. And I want to really thank you for being here. And I want to give you the last word to see what's next. If if you want to tell everybody else what's going on after this project or what you have, coming upcoming.
Thank you so much, for sure. So my next project, the show will be up for just a couple more days, until May 14th, and then I'll be doing an exhibition in Pinta, Panama. So Pinta will have the first edition of Art Week in Panama that begins May 21st and runs for that week in Panama. I'll be exhibiting a solo presentation in a project that's called Todo Esto que Parece Inventado, or in English, All This That Does Not Seem Real, which it continues to explore my relationship with the Molas, the Kuna community, and also the rich cultural effervescence that is Panama, in a similar visual language of my elaborate still lifes, but also told from a different perspective. So this is a new project with new images, and I'll also be creating an immersive experience. The exhibition will be presented by the city of Panama, and part of the Pinta Panama curated a program of events. So I'll be, installing that pretty soon, and excited to see the the progression of that project. So, um, and thank you so much for having me, and the really like really thoughtful questions. It means a lot to be part of the talk with you.
Thank you so much, Dahlia, and you have a great rest of your day, okay?
Thanks.
You're welcome.